another big difference was that this revolution wasn't Khartoum-centric. That from the beginning, there was resistance in the hinterland. I know from places like Atbara, but also from Darfur, from Kordofan, and so on, Port Sudan. I mean, I think from the earliest days of the revolution, there was talk there. And that must have required incredible coordination. I guess we're not going to hear the story, right, until the change is permanent, because people don't want to talk about how it was done. But would you agree? I mean, this was something new.
It's a huge effort. I mean, the coordination is, I personally think, not only should we hear about it, I think it should be written in history books and not just in Sudan. I think that it has a lot of historical pioneer behavior. There's so much leadership and decentralized leadership, not just one person that did it all, which I think that historically we hear locally and regionally and globally about these one-man shows that saved the country. And what's really great about this revolution is that it's not just a term of a people's revolution. There are a lot of people that made it happen. And I think one day, yes, this should be documented as transparently as possible, and it would be a great exercise to put it together and actually teach it in the history books, definitely in Sudan, but also across the world.
And the way in which self-consciously the protests are bringing people from those regions. We see all the stands and people from the various political formations. So it looks a very complex operation. One of the other issues we wanted to talk about, social forces. In terms of social forces, the role of women in this revolution. Certainly, it's a very high level of women in participation in the protests, the organization. I've interviewed a lot myself. However, I understand that some of that hasn't translated into the hierarchy of the movement. I wondered if you could give your perspectives on this.
To be honest, what's surprising is the political process the political process excluding women is what's surprising. Right. I think that a lot of people like to say that yes, it's incredible. Obviously, today it's not the same as 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, 3 weeks ago. The numbers or the ratios of women and men, I think they vary depending on the time. But the female leadership. And not participation, the female leadership in the movement and the actual streets is not something that should go unnoticed. It's definitely something that should be documented. The organizational level of it, even the logistics, the operation, the day-to-day, there's a lot of women involved. I think with the political process, I'm struggling to understand the justification for it. We've tried to hear a few of the opinions. With the DFC, I understood that something to do with structure, the structure of the signatories, not of the DFC, and the structural element has to do with the history of the different movements and parties and organizations. But I don't think it's a valid justification, because I think, for example, the civil society, there's a lot of women who are structurally in leadership positions in civil society, and the SPA, which is a very relatively new group, with the newness should have been the women. So this understanding that this is the fault of some traditional hierarchies it's just not valid. And even if there is a structural issue, this is a revolution.
Sure.
If you're going to talk about a revolution, you can revolutionize the whole thing. Who cares if that's the way it was structurally? We're not just revolting around the NCP. It's revolutionizing ways of structures and ways of arguing for things as well. I mean, if they're not in the leadership, make them, give that space.
So right now, I mean, we've got these negotiations between the Transitional Military Council and the Declaration for Freedom and Change Forces. And in the Declaration for Freedom and Change Forces, there's just one woman, or
no?
How many are there?
The declaration, I think, the negotiation, the negotiation group has one woman or two women.
Right.
But at the level of meetings outside the negotiation, there's probably three.
Okay,
or four.
Out of
many more.
Many more.
I mean, the men are a lot, and it's not just the women that's the issue. Right. So it's the women and the ethnicity part of it.
Okay.
So basically, a majority of them inside the decision-making tables are from specific, centralized ethnicities, more Arab center, Khartoum.
Oh, really? Okay, so that's the other issue, the Darfur's, Kordofan, Nuba.
Yeah, even
mountains.
the east, whatever. It's just Khartoum, so the people are very,
that's
an
another issue.
Yeah.
I mean, it would, of course, send a very clear message if there were more women and more diverse.
Yes.
I mean, they're negotiating with a bunch of generals
yes.
who are all men.
The contrast,
all of a certain age.
And I'm someone who always thinks of the imagery, so if you have an image, so the visual aspect of this revolution is you've got not just 4 weeks, you've got 4 months of a lot of women, and there's a lot of representation, and then suddenly when we started talking political process, the imagery goes from that to a bunch of men, uniformed and ununiformed, and microphones, talking about the issues of us people. It says quite a lot visually. I understand that the DFC makes a lot of effort to solve this problem.
Right.
And there is an understanding that, there's the 50% representation and that discussion. But, representation is not tokenism. So we are not saying we just want to have women there. We need women that will engage enough to make sure that the decisions and the process is in line, not just with women's issues, in line with the sense of equity, the priorities of equity that we have.
Right.
What are the priority issues that face women and men in the country? So we don't just come as women participating, we come as women leading as well.
Right.
And I think that this understanding that, we'll deal with the women's issue later, it just came out of... it surprised a lot of us, I think, and we're trying to find a way to work in parallel with that and make sure that the DFC still represents the revolution, but understands that it has to be accountable for us as women and as people in the revolution, in the actual streets.
Because we're at this tricky point, in a way. There was the big push, April 6th, then whatever discussions pushing people to the door on the night of 10th of April happened. Omer al-Bashir pushed out then. His successor came in briefly for a day. He was pushed out. So we had all this activity. And then for the last month, we've more or less been involved. We've seen the involvement of these negotiations and so on. And I guess no matter how patient people are, they've been at the protests in pretty tough conditions. And there's now people are asking questions. Both, as you say, about the representativity of the negotiators, but also where this is all leading. And also, it seems that the military, from a number of press conferences they've had in the last few weeks, are also have their own tactics and see the possibility maybe of trying to appeal to people over the heads of the forces for freedom and change. We don't know what's going on, but and then there was yesterday this appeal by the Forces for Freedom of Change, civil disobedience if the military don't get serious. I mean, how dangerous do you think this particular point in the negotiations is, Roland?
I think there's a few aspects to this. First of all, this issue of urgency and danger. People have to understand that only 4 weeks ago, less than 4 weeks ago, people were being shot at.
Right.
So this idea that it can escalate, we came from escalated.
Yeah, right. Right.
So this
it's de-escalated.
So this constant, but what if? What if we've dealt with their violence for a very long time?
Yeah.
And we tend to have short-term memory specifically related to that issue. It's that, oh my God, what if they become... They were these people. They were violent to us. They were aggressive. They were ruthless, and not just in protests. They have been ruthless in war. They've killed millions of people across the country from very different forms of oppression and violence. So to say that they might turn violent, it's kind of like we had a month break. You know? Right. So that's one thing that I think people need to understand, that the chaos that people are afraid of has already happened and may continue to happen. So it can't be the reason for us to compromise. The second thing, this idea that the DFC is fragmented, a sign that the regime remains, still exists, is that very issue. Because the amount of rumors and framing of stories. So if you have a body like the DFC, it's not even an alliance, it's almost like an assembly, it's like a parliament, right?
Okay.
They're people from very different backgrounds. They had a common understanding, which is to get rid of the regime, right? And they came together for that. But they are naturally, organically not they don't have common goals aside from these specific factors.
Right.
So like any democracy should be, there should be space for these discussions to actually come to life, for these positions to be said. So assuming that the communist and the Congress Party and the unions and the armed groups and the traditionals will have the same position about things means that we are asking for another singular narrative. And this is not what we're calling for.
Right.
We're calling for a democracy that hears and absorbs all these voices. So fragmentation is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's not fragmentation, it's difference in opinion.
Right.
The way that that we're accustomed to is the singular, this is the right way and this is the wrong way. So I think it's an exercise that requires patience and requires us to speak more about why it's healthy, why this conversation is healthy. It's healthy because we shouldn't all have the same idea of how to move forward. That's the first thing. The fact that that regime exists is that they're still making use of things that could be solved or framed in a much more positive way and making it into a failure. So this group has come together and done and taken 6 days to respond with a document.
Yeah.
In contrast, if we were to use the track of blame, in contrast, the TMC spent the same amount of time to write something, and they're not fragmented.
Yeah.
You know? So they don't come from different backgrounds. But in return, they talk about the fragmentation of the FC, but actually they're taking equally the same amount of time, and we're not being given the space to say, actually, you know, you're also taking long. We are taking long with logic.
And they're a military.
Yes, they're military. They're on the same side. I mean,
they're meant to all
yes,
do the same
you know.
things.
So frustrated as people are, and it's not no need to underestimate the frustration. It's really hot out there. It's very difficult to stay there, but it's also teaching all of us the power of these sit-ins, the power of people's choice. I think it puts pressure on the DFC, on the TMC, on anyone who wants to provide alternatives for the way forward, that they have to be accountable to people in the street, to the citizen. Right. So it's an exercise, I think, that's all inclusive in the sense that it helps everyone understand what their roles are. So in terms of the people in the sitting, the more people are tired but they remain, right, the more there's a recognition of their rights and their power of these rights, the power of their voice. Because actually, when they criticize something at the DFC quickly has to answer to it. Same thing with the military council. There is pressure that the people are exercising through their sit-ins, right, that everyone is learning from. I think that saying that it might somehow end badly, I would not say that we can say it ended badly.
Sure.
Simply because I always, if I'm frustrated, I say the former president of Sudan, Omer al-Bashir. It makes me smile for the whole day. Right. So a lot of us are really quiet. We've come a long way. We've also come a long way in understanding how organized we can be, in understanding a very important factor, which is that the DFC is not, God's word. We are getting out of that idea that everyone has to be accountable, justify why they are speaking on behalf of people. And if we don't like it, change. Right. I think that message is really important. So whatever happens in transition will have to remain accountable to the people in the sit-in, to these committees that will survive all of this and continue to be, from where they're from, the resistors. So, you wake up one day in your neighborhood and the power is cut. You know how to ask for it. You know how to organize yourself. You go at the local level. It doesn't work. You know what minister to go to. Yeah. These are things that are being learned throughout not just the past 4 weeks, the past few months and the past few years.
So that focus on the transition, that is what brings people together. So when you hear some military officers say, well, I don't know, these people don't seem to know what they want. And the other evening, al-Bashir was saying they didn't mention Sharia when they were talking about the Constitution. I put that to some of the Freedom and Change Forces people, and they said, well, actually, it's not even on the agenda. We're not talking. All we are talking, I just wanted to get this clear with you, if we've understood it. All they're talking now is the structure of the transition. And as one of your colleagues in the Sudan Congress Party said, the job descriptions of each council. We're talking about a sovereign executive council which will run the country, We're talking about a council of ministers which will run the ministry, the ministerial portfolios. We're talking about a legislative council which will look at the constitutional issues and reform issues, and maybe